Okay, real quick video to show you how to do the concept checker here for Newton's second law. You're only doing the wizard level. So an object has an acceleration of 18 meters per second, and it wants to know what's going to happen to that acceleration if the mass is doubled. Well, we saw that the acceleration is directly proportional to the net force and inversely proportional to the mass, meaning if the mass gets bigger, the acceleration gets smaller. In fact, if we double the mass, the acceleration will get smaller by a factor of 2. So I have to take the 18 here and divide by 2. And I get 9. So that's my answer. Now it's saying the mass is halved, so in that case, the acceleration is going to get bigger by a factor of 2, so it's going to be 18 times 2. Which is 36. Now we're looking at the net force. So the acceleration is directly related to the net force. So if the net force gets bigger, the acceleration gets bigger. In fact, it says the net force is tripling, so that means the acceleration triples. So 54. For this one, we have the mass again, so we have to be careful we're reading what it says. It says the mass is reduced to 1/3. Well, it's an inverse relationship between the acceleration and mass. If the mass gets smaller, then the acceleration gets bigger by that factor. So it gets bigger by a factor of 3. So 12 times 3 is 36. Okay, now we're going to be doing two things at once. The net force is tripling, so that makes the acceleration bigger by a factor of 3, but it says that the mass is being halved. Well, it's an inverse relationship between the acceleration and mass, so if the mass gets smaller, then the acceleration gets bigger. So it's going to get bigger by the net force tripling and bigger because the mass is getting smaller. So it's going to be 3 times bigger because the net force is bigger. And it's going to be 2 times bigger because the mass is bigger. So 3 times 2 is 6. It's going to be 6 times bigger altogether. So that would be 6 times 6, which is 36. And for this one, we have the net force is doubling and the mass is tripling. So if the net force gets bigger, the acceleration gets bigger. But if the mass gets bigger, the acceleration gets smaller. So it's going to be getting bigger by a factor of 2, but then it's going to get smaller by a factor of 3. So it's going to be 2/3 of 6. So 2/3 of 6, 6 times 2 divided by 3. So it's going to be 4 now. So that's how you do these problems. So after you've done the entire thing, so you know how to do these problems at the wizard level, then you're going to go in and do the concept check.